Here we go again. A run on Victorian supermarkets marked the moment 5 million residents of Melbourne found out these excursions will be just about the only ones they'll be allowed until mid-September.
We can no longer have people visiting others. We can no longer have people simply out and about for no good reason whatsoever. From 6 p.m. tonight, I am declaring a state of disaster.
That means a far more strict lockdown. Think March in the UK, but with an overnight curfew thrown in.
People are going to be worried because we don't know what's happening.
This is our table of supplies for going out.
Josh Hunt lives in Melbourne with his fiancée Lisa. They've already postponed their wedding twice.
Certainly 2020 has not been the year we'd envisaged.
For a long time this year, Australia seemed to be doing comparatively far better than many other countries in the world. Did you think at that point that you'd ever be in this situation?
We dodged a bullet the first time round, and the majority of our cases were overseas acquired. The fact that it's now community transmission, I don't think anyone saw coming. I think it's a fairly surprising set of circumstances that we find ourselves in.
There was some confidence early on the virus could be suppressed in Australia, maybe even eradicated. The border closed months ago, and any international arrivals must spend 2 weeks locked in government-allocated hotel rooms. But in Victoria, some of the security guards patrolling those rooms were accused of breaking distancing rules.
This particular quarantine is very, very different than the first one. People are a lot more, I guess, everyone's a bit more down about it, to be honest.
Brad Elliott and Anna Albury were in the middle of moving house interstate. Now they're stuck in their friend's music studio with 10-month-old baby Archie, who's making the best of a bad situation.
We're quite unsure of what even the next week looks like, really. Which is very interesting and challenging.
Yeah.
The success of Australia's early border lockdown is why Victoria is cracking down now, hoping to get ahead of the curve again. The death toll there is 208. Here, it's more than 46,000. Any fears of another surge seem far from the minds of those enjoying the sun in Newark. There have been reports Number 10 is considering so-called nuclear options if needed, like scrapping all international quarantine exemptions or ring-fencing London inside the M25 and expanding shielding, including far more over 50s.
Well, we don't have any plans to do that, but moving forwards, we hope to be able to operate on a localised approach. And you've seen in Leicester, for example, that we have provided guidance to the shielded to stay at home for a bit longer. But we don't have any plans for a national blanket approach.
But the many questions over the UK's handling of the first widespread wave do mean more pressure on Downing Street for decisive and perhaps drastic action in the event of another.
Well, I'm now joined by Stephen Reischer, Professor of Social Psychology at the University of St Andrews. He advises both the UK and Scottish governments on their response to the crisis. And Dr David Nabarro, the World Health Organization's Special Envoy for the response to COVID-19. David Nabarro, what should Britain be learning from what's going on abroad right now?
Thanks very much. First of all, just to stress that we really have to take this virus seriously. It doesn't actually respect any political dogma. It doesn't get bored. It just comes back relentlessly. It surges back really quickly. So what I'm saying to everybody is please take it seriously and put in place the necessary defences at the community level so that it's possible for society to get ahead of it. And I'm impressed by what's happening in Melbourne. It seems the right thing to be doing right now.
Stephen Reischer, the government seems at great pains to make clear it will not be doing another national lockdown, that all action is now going to be local in England. Is that the right approach for clarity?
Well, I mean, the first thing is, in terms of international lessons, I think one of the clearest international lessons, and one of the lessons we're learning in this country as well, is if you relax restrictions in haste, you repent at leisure. And my concern with what's going on at the moment is that there doesn't seem to be an overall strategy at all. The government, for a number of weeks now, seems to have been perfectly happy with thousands of new infections a day. And as we've just heard, this is a serious disease. Even if you don't die from it, it can do you a lot of damage. And rather than taking the opportunity to relentlessly drive the level of infection down so that when we do reopen, we can do so safely, we've been somewhat complacent. Now we've got a limited amount of time before the winter comes, and it's all the more important that we use all the measures we can, as I say, to drive the infection down so it's so low that we can then be safe in relaxing. And that means, first of all, that when we do reopen, we do it carefully, step by step, and monitor what's happening. Secondly, that we certify that spaces are safe before we reopen. We don't just wish and hope that it's so. Thirdly, and this is absolutely critical, that we have a testing system that is robust and doesn't only test and trace people, but supports to people to self-isolate if necessary. And finally, we need clarity about the information. If I could just finish with this one remarkable fact. A survey came out from University College London just the other day showing that a mere 14% of people feel they fully understand what the government regulations and restrictions are. 14%. And that's clearly not good enough if we want to get to a stage where we get on top of this pandemic.
David Nabarro, does that worry you that we've gone in Britain from a place where everybody understood stay at home to now just 14% saying they understand all the restrictions?
Yes, it does concern me. Unless people have clear and consistent and factually correct information, they will not know what they've got to do, and they might end up unwittingly fueling the transmission of the virus. I think that right now, as has been said already, this is a time when everybody has to be really careful and working according to the same consistent messaging. So I would very much request that real efforts are made now to make sure that the information reaching people is consistent and is correct.
But there is a disagreement in the UK between what the right strategy should be. The Scottish government says we need a zero COVID strategy, which drives down the virus, very firmly. And in England, we have more of an acceptable level of infection approach, in which we're sort of trying to contain outbreaks as they pop up, what Boris Johnson calls whack-a-mole. Which of those two strategies do you, as the World Health Organization, think is best?
You need both. I'm sorry to be prevaricating, but it's the following. You've got to keep the levels as low as possible. There's no level of COVID that's really acceptable. You've got to get it right down, as Stephen just said. But at the same time, you're going to get further outbreaks. The virus is unforgiving and it comes back. So you've got to be on the alert for new outbreaks, and you've got to be able to interrupt transmission and suppress them effectively. Those are the two elements of a strategy that will enable us to live with this virus for the foreseeable future.
Stephen Reischer, I mean, could it be that the government is a victim of its own success early on? That actually, the early stay-at-home message was just too good for the economy to be able to survive. And so everything it's doing since is about sort of saying, we've also got to keep on living.
I think the success early on was in many ways the public's rather than the government's. What was remarkable was the high level of compliance, and at points even despite rather than because of the government. So, for instance, when certain members of the government broke lockdown, and that was condoned by the government, trust in the government fell catastrophically by about 20% in a week. But people continued to comply in many ways despite the government. They understood what was necessary to do. Now, people still, I think, want to comply. Nobody wants to get this disease. But in order for people to do the right thing, they need to be supported by the government. They need good information, and that's not happening. We're seeing contradictions. We're seeing lockdowns imposed by tweet late at night without even the ministers fully knowing what the regulations are. And we also need support for people. You see, I actually deeply dislike the term lockdown. term lockdown suggests that people have done something wrong. It's punitive, that they're at fault. We know that the people who are most likely to get infected and where infections are likely to happen are the most deprived. And therefore, they're the people most in need of support.
Stephen
So we
Reich.
shouldn't be thinking in terms of lockdown, but in terms of supporting those people with resources, with information, with testing. And that way, they're much more likely to buy in. So my final point, very
We must
simply,
leave it, I'm afraid. I'm sorry.
People will do their bit if the government does theirs.
OK, thank you very much. I'm sorry to wind you up. We're just out of time. Stephen Reich and David Nabarro, thank you both very much.